Welcome, dear listener, to this journey through the clouds and thunder of ancient Greece. Tonight, as you settle into comfort and prepare for restful sleep, we'll explore one of mythology's most powerful and complex figures. Let the gentle rhythm of this tale carry you into peaceful dreams as we discover how a hidden infant became the mighty Zeus, king of the gods and ruler of Mount Olympus. This is a story that spans the breadth of the cosmos itself, from the deepest pit of Tartarus to the highest peak of cloud-wreathed Olympus. It's a tale of prophecy and deception, of mother's love and cosmic warfare, of thunderbolts forged in divine fires and destinies carved in stone. But for tonight, let these ancient myths wash over you like waves upon the shore, each detail a soothing rhythm guiding you toward rest. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. Let your body sink into softness as we travel back to a time when gods walked the earth and shaped the very fabric of existence. The story of Zeus begins not with triumph, but with fear, not with power, but with vulnerability. And in that beginning, we find a tale as old as time itself, the time before Zeus, the age of Titans. Before there was Zeus, before there was Olympus crowned in clouds, before the thunderbolt split the sky, there was darkness. Absolute, infinite darkness. The ancient Greeks called this primordial state chaos, the void from which all things would emerge. It was not evil, not destruction, but simply emptiness, potential waiting to take form. From this chaos arose the first beings, the most ancient powers of the universe. Gaia emerged, Mother Earth herself, the broad bosom foundation of all life to come. She was the land beneath every footstep, the soil that would nurture countless generations, the mountains that would pierce the clouds, and the valleys that would cradle rivers. Gaia was both gentle mother and terrible force, patient and eternal, and from the darkness also came Uranus, father sky, vast and star-studded, stretching endlessly above the earth. When Gaia and Uranus came together, their union was the meeting of earth and heaven, and from this sacred coupling, the world, as the Greeks knew it, began to take shape. Their first children were unlike anything that would come after. Gaia gave birth to the Titans, 12 powerful beings who embodied the primal forces of nature and cosmos. There was Oceanus, whose waters encircled the entire world, and his sister wife Tethys, goddess of the underground waters that fed all the rivers and streams. There was Hyperion, titan of light, whose very presence made the day brilliant, and his sister Theia, who governed sight and vision, the shimmer of gold and the sparkle of jewels. Coeus represented the axis of heaven, intelligence and foresight, while Phoebe, his sister, shone with prophetic wisdom and the silver light of the moon. Creus embodied heavenly constellations, the patterns that guided sailors and marked the seasons. Iapetus stood as the titan of mortality, the one who would father Prometheus, the friend of mankind. Themis, whose name means divine law, represented the natural order, the unwritten rules that governed even the gods. Mnemosyne was memory itself, the preservation of all that had been and would be. And there was Rhea, whose name may mean flow or ease, who would become the mother of gods. But of all these mighty titans, none would prove more significant, more terrible in his ambition than Cronus, the youngest. Some ancient sources describe him as having a serpentine lower body, though most imagine him as a powerful male figure holding a sickle, the adamantine blade that would become his symbol and his curse. Yet Gaia and Uranus did not stop with the Titans. They also bore the Cyclopes, three massive beings, each with a single eye set in the center of their foreheads. Brontes, whose name means thunder, Steropes, whose name means lightning, and Arges, whose name means brightness. These three would one day forge weapons to shake the cosmos, but this time had not yet come. They were creatures of immense strength and skill, their single eyes able to see things hidden from all others. And still Gaia's womb was not empty. She bore the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, three brothers of unimaginable power, Praearius, Cottus, and Gyges, each possessing 50 heads and 100 arms, were embodiments of violent storms, of hurricanes that could level cities and waves that could swallow ships. They were force incarnate, neither good nor evil, simply overwhelming. But Uranus, Father Sky, looked upon these youngest children and felt not pride but horror. The Cyclopes with their single eye, the Hecatonchires with their multitude of hands and heads, they seemed monstrous to him, aberrations that offended his sense of order. In his fear and disgust, Uranus did something unforgivable. He seized these children of his flesh and thrust them back into Gaia's body, imprisoning them deep within the earth, in a place of darkness and pain. Can you imagine the agony of Mother Earth, forced to hold these powerful beings within her depths, feeling their suffering, their rage, their desperate attempts to break free? The pain was unbearable, and Gaia's grief transformed into cold fury. She would have vengeance upon Uranus for this cruelty. She would see him overthrown. From her essence, Gaia forged a sickle of adamant, a divine metal harder than any mortal blade, sharp enough to cut the flesh of a god. She called her Titan children to her and presented them with this weapon. "Who among you will avenge me?" she asked. "Who will punish your father for his crimes?" The Titans fell silent, for Uranus was powerful, the very sky itself, and to strike against him was to challenge the fundamental order of the cosmos. Fear held them in check. All except one, Cronus, the youngest, stepped forward. Perhaps he was bolder than his siblings. Perhaps he was more ambitious, or perhaps he simply loved his mother more than he feared his father. Whatever the reason, Cronus took the adamantine sickle and swore to do what must be done. Gaia helped her son hide, concealing him in a place where Uranus would not see him coming. And when night fell, when Uranus descended to lie with Gaia as he had done countless times before, spreading himself over the earth in darkness, Cronus struck. With one terrible sweep of the sickle, he castrated his father, severing the connection between earth and sky forever. Uranus's blood fell upon Gaia, and from those drops sprang new life. The Erinyes, or Furies, were born from that divine blood, spirits of vengeance who would pursue those who killed their own kin. The giants too emerged, powerful beings who would one day rise against the gods. And when the severed parts of Uranus fell into the sea, the foam that gathered around them would eventually become Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, born from violence, but embodying desire. With Uranus overthrown, Cronus claimed dominion over the cosmos. The age of the Titans had truly begun. Cronus took his sister Rhea as his wife, a union that would shape the future of the divine world. Under his rule, an age of prosperity unfolded. This was the Golden Age, when the earth brought forth food without labor, when the humans lived long lives without sickness or war, when death came gently like sleep, and the deceased became blessed spirits watching over the land. Cronus ruled from his mountain fortress, and for a time, all seemed well. But Cronus had learned something terrible from his actions. He had learned that sons overthrow fathers. It was the pattern of the universe, apparently, the younger generation rising to supplant the old. And this knowledge festered in his mind like poison. Gaia and Uranus, knowing what was to come, delivered a prophecy to Cronus. As you overthrew your father, they told him, so too shall you be overthrown by one of your children. The pattern will repeat. The cycle will continue. This prophecy, meant perhaps as warning or as justice, became Cronus's obsession. He would not allow it to come true. He would not suffer his father's fate. And so when Rhea gave birth to their first child, a beautiful daughter named Hestia, Cronus did something that shocked even the other titans. He swallowed the infant whole. Hestia vanished into the darkness of her father's stomach, alive but imprisoned, conscious but helpless, and there she would remain, the firstborn goddess, trapped in the belly of the Titan king. The hidden birth of Zeus. Rhea's heart shattered as she watched her firstborn disappear down Cronus's throat. The cry that escaped her lips was the cry of every mother who has lost a child, a sound of pure anguish that echoed across the mountains. But Cronus felt only relief. The prophecy could not come true if his children never grew to challenge him. It was, in his mind, the perfect solution. But it was a solution built on horror, and that horror would repeat itself with terrible regularity when Rhea gave birth to her second child, a daughter named Demeter who would have governed the harvest and the cycles of growth. Cronus swallowed her too. Down into darkness went the infant goddess to join her sister in their father's belly, both alive in that strange prison, aware but unable to act. The pattern continued with dreadful inevitability. Hera was born, who should have been queen of the heavens, protector of marriage and women, and Cronus swallowed her. Hades emerged into the world, dark-haired and solemn, who would have ruled the underworld and the riches beneath the earth, and Cronus swallowed him. And then came Poseidon, powerful even as an infant, who should have commanded the seas and caused earthquakes with his trident, and Cronus swallowed him as well. 5 children, 5 gods and goddesses, all imprisoned before they could even speak their first words. Rhea's grief grew with each loss, transforming from the sharp pain of fresh wounds into a deep, abiding sorrow that colored every moment of her existence. She was a mother without children, her arms perpetually empty, her heart perpetually breaking. But Rhea was more than grief. She was also fury, and she was determination. When she felt the stirring of her 6th child within her womb, she knew that this time would be different. This child would not suffer the fate of its siblings. This child would live, would grow, would become what it was meant to be. She would make certain of it, even if she had to deceive the Lord of the Titans himself. Rhea turned to the very beings who had once prophesied Cronus's downfall. She went to her mother Gaia, the earth, and to the shade of her father Uranus, the sky, and she begged them for help. Tell me how to save this child, she pleaded. Tell me how to keep one baby from the monster my husband has become. And Gaia, who understood a mother's love, who had herself suffered at the hands of Uranus, took pity on her daughter. She devised a plan, cunning and dangerous, that would require perfect timing and nerves of steel. Rhea would travel to the island of Crete, to a hidden place where Cronus would not think to look. There she would give birth in secret, and in place of the infant, she would give Cronus something else to swallow. The ancient sources differ slightly on the exact location of Zeus's birth. Hesiod places it in Lyctus, Crete, with the infant hidden in a cave on Mount Aegean. But the most enduring tradition, the one that captured the Greek imagination and drew pilgrims for centuries, placed Zeus's birth in the Dictaean cave on Mount Ida in Crete, or perhaps the cave near the village of Sycro. These were sacred places, dripping with stalactites, echoing with the sound of underground water, hidden from the eyes of heaven by thick stone. When Rhea felt her labor beginning, she journeyed to Crete in secret. The journey itself must have been agonizing, traveling while carrying a child, knowing that at any moment Cronus might discover her absence and pursue her. But she made it to that sacred cave, and there, in darkness lit only by the faint glow of divine presence, she gave birth to her sixth child. They say that the earth itself rejoiced at Zeus's birth, that flowers bloomed out of season, that rivers ran sweet with nectar. Whether these miracles truly occurred or are simply the embellishments of later poets, we cannot know. But we do know that Rhea held her newborn son, felt his warmth, heard his first cry, and made a vow. This child would survive. This child would thrive. This child would be free. But there was no time for a mother's joy. No time to rest after childbirth and marvel at tiny fingers and toes. Rhea had to move quickly. She took a stone, large and roughly the shape of a swaddled infant, and she wrapped it in cloth, bundling it as she would a baby. According to some versions of the myth, Gaia herself provided this stone, choosing one from Mount Caucasus or some other sacred place, a stone imbued with just enough divine essence that Cronus might mistake it for his child. Then came the most difficult part. Rhea had to return to Cronus and pretend that nothing was amiss. She had to act the part of the defeated mother once more, to present her child to her husband with resignation and sorrow. And Cronus, confident in his power, perhaps somewhat dulled by his repeated crimes, took the bundled stone without question. Some versions of the myth add a particularly dark detail. They say that Cronus asked Rhea to nurse the child one last time before he swallowed it, wanting to maintain some pretense of mercy, some illusion that he was not the monster he had become. And Rhea, her heart breaking, had to play along with this charade, holding the stone to her breast as if it were her infant son. Then Cronus swallowed the stone whole, just as he had swallowed the 5 children before it. It descended into his stomach, settling there among the imprisoned gods and goddesses, and Cronus felt relief once more. 6 children, 6 potential threats, all neutralized. The prophecy would not come true. He had outwitted fate itself, or so he believed. Back in Crete, the real Zeus, the infant god who would reshape the cosmos, lay in a hidden cave, and Rhea faced a new challenge. How does one raise a divine child in secret? How does one keep a baby god hidden from the Lord of the universe? She couldn't stay with him herself, not without arousing Cronus's suspicion. So she entrusted Zeus's care to others, to beings who lived far from Cronus's gaze and who would protect the child with their lives. Different traditions name different guardians for the infant Zeus. Most accounts agree that nymphs played a crucial role. Adrastea and Ide, daughters of Melicius, are most commonly named. These were not the seductive water nymphs of later tales, but ancient spirits of nature, powerful in their own right nurturing and fierce in equal measure. They took Zeus into their care with the solemnity of a sacred duty. And there was Amalthea. Amalthea deserves special mention in our story. In some versions, she's a nymph, the most devoted of Zeus's guardians. But in the tradition that captured the Greek imagination most vividly, Amalthea was a goat. Yes, a goat, but no ordinary animal. She was divine, sacred, her milk possessing properties that would nourish a god. Picture the scene, if you will, in that hidden cave on Crete. The infant Zeus, swaddled in soft cloth, suckled at Amalthea's teats, drinking in divine nourishment that would make him strong. The goat stood patient and gentle, understanding somehow the importance of the small being she fed. The nymphs sang soft songs, ancient melodies that predated language itself, soothing lullabies that would follow Zeus throughout his life as half-remembered music. But nourishment alone wouldn't keep Zeus safe. Cronus, though fooled for now, still possessed immense power. If he ever heard the cry of an infant from that cave, if any sound reached his ears that suggested his youngest child lived, he would come and he would destroy them all. So, additional measures were necessary. Enter the Quret, warrior spirits, or perhaps an order of priests, depending on which account you trust. These fierce beings danced outside Zeus's cave, and their dance was like no other. They clashed their spears against their shields, in a constant rhythmic cacophony, a wall of sound that drowned out any noise the infant might make. Night and day they danced and shouted, their war cries echoing across the mountains. Imagine trying to sleep to that sound. Constant metal striking metal, voices raised in fierce shouts. But that very noise that would keep anyone else awake was Zeus's shield, his protection, the barrier between him and discovery. The Quretts never faltered, never stopped, taking shifts perhaps, but ensuring that the noise never ceased. And so Zeus grew. He spent his earliest years in that cave, surrounded by nymphs and the rhythmic clashing of shields, drinking Amalthea's milk and breathing the sweet air of Crete. The cave itself was special, some say, filled with honey from sacred bees, with walls that gleamed with gold in certain lights, with water that fell in musical drops from stone formations that took millions of years to form. As Zeus aged from infant to child, the nymphs taught him many things. They taught him about the natural world, about the stars and seasons, about the creatures that walked the earth and flew through the air. They taught him about his father too, though carefully, ensuring that fear did not break his spirit, but instead forged his determination. Adrastea, some say, gave Zeus his first toys, not ordinary playthings, but divine objects. A golden ball that, when thrown, left a trail of light like a shooting star. A set of knuckle bones carved from the bones of primordial beasts. These were tools for learning as much as entertainment, each one teaching the young god about different aspects of existence. And as he played in that cave, protected by noise and geography and divine will, Zeus developed the qualities that would define him. He learned patience from waiting, hidden and small. He learned strategy from listening to the nymphs' stories of Cronus's overthrow of Uranus. He learned justice from understanding that his father's actions were wrong, that power misused becomes tyranny. But mostly, he learned about family. He knew that he had siblings, 5 brothers and sisters, whom he'd never met, trapped in darkness through no fault of their own. He knew that he had a mother who loved him enough to deceive one of the most powerful beings in the cosmos. And he knew with the certainty of prophecy and the fire of youth that one day he would make things right. The years passed in that cave, marked by the changing seasons outside and the constant sound of shields clashing. Zeus grew from baby to boy, from boy to youth, from youth to young man. His divine nature meant that this growth happened faster than it would for a mortal, compressed and intensified. And with each passing day, he grew stronger, more determined, more ready for the destiny that awaited him. One day, the story goes, when Zeus had reached young adulthood, something changed. Maybe it was a signal from Gaia. Maybe it was simply that he knew, with the certainty that gods sometimes possess, that the time had come. He emerged from that cave on Crete, blinking in the sunlight he'd rarely seen, taking his first steps into the wider world. The curettes stopped their dance, the nymphs wept, knowing that their charge was leaving them, stepping into terrible danger. Amalthea, if the accounts are true, gave Zeus one final gift. She shed one of her horns, or perhaps Zeus took it gently, and that horn became the cornucopia, the horn of plenty, capable of producing endless abundance. It was a last blessing from the creature who had nourished him, a reminder of gentleness and plenty, even as he prepared for war. Zeus stood at the mouth of that cave and looked out across Crete, across the sea beyond, toward the lands where his father ruled and his siblings suffered. He was young, untested in battle, unknown to the wider world. But he carried within him the strength of prophecy, the love of those who raised him, and the absolute certainty of purpose. He began his journey toward Mount Othrys, toward confrontation, toward destiny. And the world, though it did not yet know it, would never be the same. Zeus's return and the liberation. Zeus traveled from Crete to the mainland, each step taking him closer to the confrontation that had been prophesied before his birth. He moved with purpose, but also with caution. For despite his divine nature and growing power, he was still untested. Cronus had ruled for ages, had the loyalty of many titans commanded respect and fear across the cosmos. Zeus was a young god, unknown, with no army, no allies, no weapons save his own courage and the righteousness of his cause. But fate, it seemed, had plans for Zeus. Or perhaps it was simply that the universe recognized in him something that had been lacking, a quality that Cronus, for all his power, did not possess. For as Zeus made his way through the world, he encountered someone who would prove essential to his success, someone whose wisdom would guide him through the coming storm. Her name was Metis, and she was an Oceanid, a daughter of Oceanus and Tethys, the titan of the great river that encircled the world. But Metis was more than her parentage. She embodied cunning and wisdom, practical intelligence of the highest order. Her name literally meant wise counsel, and in all the cosmos, there was no one whose advice was more valuable, no one who could devise plans more subtle or effective. Some accounts suggest that Zeus actively sought Metis out, having heard of her reputation. Others imply that she found him, recognizing something in this young god that spoke of change and possibility. However they met, Metis saw in Zeus what his father feared: potential. Not just the potential for power, but for something greater. Justice, order. A rule based not on fear, but on something better. Your father has done a terrible thing, Metis told Zeus. though he already knew this. He has imprisoned your siblings, swallowed them whole to prevent the prophecy from coming true. But the prophecy will come true, Zeus. It must. The question is not whether you will overthrow Cronus, but how and what will come after. Zeus listened, and in listening, showed the quality that would define his reign. He did not rush forward in blind rage. He did not let anger cloud his judgment. He asked Metis to help him, to devise a plan that would free his siblings with minimal risk, that would give them a chance at victory without unnecessary destruction. And Metis, with her vast wisdom, conceived of a solution elegant in its simplicity. An emetic, a potion that would cause Cronus to vomit up everything he had swallowed. The stone that Rhea had substituted would come up, and with it, all 5 of Zeus's siblings, still alive after all these years in their father's belly, preserved by their divine nature but desperate for freedom. The potion itself was no simple thing to create. Metis gathered ingredients from across the world, herbs that grew only on certain mountains at certain times of year, waters from sacred springs, elements that shouldn't mix but that Moti's knowledge allowed her to combine. She worked in secret, in hidden places, preparing this weapon that was not a weapon, this tool of liberation that looked like nothing more than a simple drink. But how to get Cronus to consume it? The Titan Lord was suspicious by nature, made more paranoid by the very crimes he'd committed. He trusted no one fully, questioned everything, saw potential threats in every shadow. Simply presenting him with a cup would never work. So Zeus and Metis devised a more elaborate plan. Zeus would approach Cronus not as a son, not as a threat, but as a supplicant. Perhaps he would claim to be a minor god seeking position, or a traveler with news. The exact details varied in the telling, but the essence was the same. Zeus would gain access to Cronus's presence through guile rather than force, would earn a moment of his father's attention, a brief lowering of his guard, and then, at the right moment, the emetic would be slipped into Cronus's drink. Perhaps Zeus would pose as a cupbearer. Perhaps Metis herself would infiltrate Cronus's household. The methods were less important than the result. The plan was set. Zeus made his way to Cronus's stronghold, his heart beating fast, but his face calm, his hand steady. He was playing the most dangerous game of his life, approaching the being who would most want him dead, carrying a weapon disguised as medicine. What must Cronus have thought when he saw Zeus? Did he recognize his son? Some versions suggest that Cronus knew immediately who stood before him, that he saw himself in Zeus's features, saw Rhea's eyes looking back at him. Other accounts suggest he had no idea, that Zeus was just another young god, unremarkable, unworthy of notice. But whether through recognition or deception, Zeus managed what he had set out to do. He got the emetic to Cronus. Maybe he poured it himself into his father's wine. Maybe Metis, disguised, served it at a feast. However it happened, Cronus drank the potion down, not knowing that with every swallow he was undoing years of his own terrible work. The effects were not immediate. For a moment, perhaps, Cronus felt nothing unusual, and then his stomach began to churn. A terrible pressure built within him. Unlike anything he'd experienced, the feeling grew and grew, overwhelming, irresistible, and suddenly Cronus was vomiting. First came the stone, the one Rhea had wrapped in swaddling clothes all those years ago. It emerged, intact, clattering to the floor. Its deception finally revealed. And Cronus, in that moment, knew what was happening, knew that he had been tricked, that the child he thought safely swallowed had never been swallowed at all. But there was no time for realization to turn into action, because Cronus was still vomiting. And now what emerged was far more significant than a stone. Poseidon came up first, since he'd been swallowed last, preserved in his full divine glory, unchanged by his time and darkness. He emerged, confused, disoriented, but very much alive and very much free. Then came Hades, dark and grim and furious, his eyes adjusting to light after all those years of darkness. He had been conscious all that time, aware of his imprisonment, and his rage was cold and terrible. Hera emerged next, proud and imperious, even in this an undignified moment of rebirth, already carrying herself like the queen she would become. Then Demeter, who had dreamed of fields and harvests and growing things during her imprisonment, who emerged desperate to feel soil under her feet and sun on her face. And finally Hestia, the firstborn, who had spent the longest time in that belly prison, who emerged with dignity and grace despite everything. The eldest sister, ready finally to take her place in the world. 5 gods and goddesses, fully grown despite never having lived, aged to adulthood by their divine nature, stood free for the first time in their existence. They looked around in wonder and confusion, saw Cronus doubled over and weakened, saw Zeus standing there, a young god they had never met but who was clearly their brother, their liberator. There must have been a moment, a single heartbeat, when everything hung in balance. Cronus, even weakened, was still powerful. The children were disoriented, didn't yet understand the full situation. Everything could have gone wrong right then. But Zeus spoke. "Brothers, sisters," he said, and his voice carried an authority that surprised even him. "Our father imprisoned you to prevent a prophecy. He feared that his children would overthrow him as he overthrew his own father. And he was right to fear, for we will do exactly that. But we will do it justly. We will overthrow tyranny and establish something better. Will you stand with me?" The answer was never in doubt. Hades, Poseidon, Hera, Demeter, Hestia, all of them looked at Cronus, looked at the being who had swallowed them alive, who had kept them in darkness out of fear, and they made their choice. "We stand with you," Poseidon said, his voice already carrying the rumble of the sea. "Now and always," Hera added, her words a vow that would prove complicated in the years to come, but that in this moment was absolute. "Let us build something new," Demeter agreed. Cronus, recovering from the emetic, roared with rage and fear. He called for his Titan siblings, for his allies, for anyone who would stand with him. Because Cronus understood, even if his children didn't yet, that what was beginning here was not just a family dispute. It was the end of an age and the beginning of another. It was war. The Titans heard their king's call. Some came willingly, loyal to Cronus, or perhaps simply to the order he represented. Others came reluctantly, forced by oaths or obligation, but they came gathering their strength, rallying to Mount Othrys, where the Titans had always made their seat of power. And Zeus, his 5 siblings standing with him, understood that freeing them had been only the first step. The real challenge, the true test, lay ahead. They were 6 gods against an army of Titans, against beings who had ruled since the dawn of time, against power so vast it shaped the very earth and sky. But Zeus had something the Titans did not. He had justice on his side. He had siblings who fought not out of obligation, but out of love and shared purpose. And he had knowledge of two potential allies, two groups of beings who hated Cronus even more than Zeus did, who had suffered under Titan rule longer than anyone, the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires, still imprisoned where Cronus had thrown them after his own father's overthrow, trapped in the deepest pit of Tartarus. If Zeus could free them, if he could gain their support, then perhaps, just perhaps, the prophecy would come true. Zeus gathered his siblings and Medes and told them his plan. "We need allies," he said. "We need weapons, and both can be found in the same place." "Tartarus," Hades said, understanding immediately. "You want to go to Tartarus and free the prisoners." "More than one," Zeus replied. "We must. Without them, we cannot win. With them, we cannot lose." And so the 6 Olympians, as they would come to be called, made their way down into the earth, past caves and caverns, past the roots of mountains, past underground rivers, down to the very bottom of the world where Tartarus yawned like a wound in reality. There, behind walls of bronze and gates that hadn't opened since Cronus sealed them, the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires waited in darkness, their only company their own rage and sorrow. They had given up hope of freedom long ago. They had accepted that they would spend eternity in this pit. But Zeus called out to them. "Children of Uranus and Gaia," he shouted through the bronze gates. "I am Zeus, son of Cronus and Rhea. I come to offer you freedom if you will offer us your aid. The Titan who imprisoned you is the same Titan who imprisoned my siblings and myself. Help us overthrow him, and you will never be chained again." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then a voice, deep as the grinding of tectonic plates, answered from the darkness. "The son of Cronus speaks of freedom. The child of the one who sealed us here offers release. Why should we believe you?" "Because," Zeus answered, his voice steady and clear, "I am not my father. I will not make his mistakes. I will not rule through fear and imprisonment. Help me prove that the age of tyranny is ending." And perhaps it was the sincerity in his voice. Perhaps it was simply that even the faintest hope is better than none. Perhaps it was that the Cyclopes, with their singular vision, could see truth where others might not. Whatever the reason, they chose to believe. Zeus and his siblings broke open the gates of Tartarus. The bronze groaned and shrieked as it bent. Divine strength applied to locks that hadn't been tested in ages. And when the gates finally swung open, out came beings the world had not seen in countless years. The 3 Cyclopes emerged first, massive and terrible, and beautiful in their strangeness. Their single eyes blazed with light after so long in darkness, each eye seeing not just what was, but what could be. They were master craftsmen, artisans whose skill exceeded anything the mortal world would ever know. And they looked at Zeus with gratitude and something more. Recognition of kinship, of shared purpose. "Zeus, son of Cronus," said Brontes, whose name means thunder, "you have freed us from torment. In return, we will forge for you weapons such as the world has never seen. Weapons worthy of the new rulers of the cosmos. For you," said Steropes, whose name means lightning, "we will forge the thunderbolt, a weapon of such power that it will shake the heavens themselves, that will mark you as the supreme god. That will be your symbol for all eternity." "And for your brothers," said Arges, whose name means brightness, We will forge weapons to match their natures, tools that will make them powers to be feared across creation. Then the hecatonctures emerged, and even Zeus took a step back at the sight of them. Briareus, Cautus, and Gyges, each with 50 heads, each head capable of independent thought, each with 100 arms, each arm capable of wielding a weapon. They were living sieges, walking fortresses, beings of such overwhelming physical power that even the Titans feared them. "We remember Cronus's cruelty," rumbled Cautus, speaking with all 50 mouths at once, creating a chorus of voices. "We remember the darkness. We remember the pain. Point us at your enemies, Zeus, and they will fall." With these allies secured, Zeus led his growing army back to the surface, back to the world of light and air. And in a place apart, the Cyclopes began their work, drawing on arts and knowledge that predated humanity itself, forging weapons from materials that existed at the boundary of physical and divine. They worked their forge with the heat of the earth's core, with flames that burned different colors, with hammers that rang out rhythms older than music. And slowly, magnificently, the weapons took shape. The Titanomachy, the 10-year war. The thunderbolt emerged from the Cyclops' forge first, and it was like nothing that had existed before. It wasn't simply a weapon. It was a manifestation of the storm itself, of the raw power of the sky contained in a form Zeus could wield. When he held it for the first time, lightning danced along his arms. Thunder rumbled in response to his heartbeat, and the very air around him crackled with barely contained energy. The bolt was shaped like a spear of pure light, but it was more than light. It was sound. It was force. It was the moment when clouds break open, and the sky itself seems to split. When Zeus threw it, it wouldn't just strike a target. It would obliterate everything in its path, would burn with heat hotter than any earthly fire, would leave behind the smell of ozone and the echo of thunder that took minutes to fade. But the Cyclopes didn't stop with Zeus. For Poseidon, they forged a trident, three-pronged and powerful, capable of stirring the seas into fury, or calming them with a touch, capable of causing earthquakes when struck against the ground, a weapon that would make its wielder master of all waters and all that lay beneath the earth. For Hades, they created a helmet, but this was no ordinary armor. The Helm of Darkness, as it came to be called, granted its wearer complete invisibility. Not just invisibility of body, but invisibility of presence. When Hades wore it, he ceased to exist in any detectable way, became a ghost, a shadow, able to move through the world unseen and unheard. The perfect tool for the god who would rule the realm of the dead. Armed with these divine weapons, Zeus and his siblings prepared for war. They established their base on Mount Olympus, a mountain so high its peak pierced the clouds, so sacred that its very stones seemed to thrum with divine power. Here, on this peak, they built their fortress, gathered their allies, and made ready for the conflict that would shake the cosmos. Across from them, on Mount Othrys, the Titans gathered under Cronus's leadership. The old god of time had rallied most of his siblings to his cause. Hyperion stood with him, bringing the power of the sun's light. Iapetus joined the battle, his 4 sons, including Prometheus and Atlas, among the Titans' strength. Oceanus and Tethys remained mostly neutral, but their children, the river gods, largely sided with the Titans. Crius, Coeus, and many others swore loyalty to Cronus. choosing the old order over the uncertain future Zeus represented. But not all the Titans joined Cronus. Some made different choices. Themis, the goddess of divine law and order, looked at the situation and saw which side truly represented justice. She joined Zeus, bringing with her not just her power but her authority. The sense that even among these cosmic beings, some things were right and some were wrong, and Zeus's cause was right. Prometheus, despite his father Iapetus fighting for Cronus, gave his loyalty to Zeus, perhaps seeing further into the future than others could, understanding that this change was necessary and inevitable. The two armies faced each other across a valley that legend says was in Thessaly, though the truth is that this war ranged across the entire world. They stared at each other, these divine beings, and the tension was so thick that mortals, if any existed yet to witness this, would have felt it pressing down on them like a physical weight. Zeus stepped forward, his new thunderbolt in hand. "Cronus," he called out, his voice carrying across the distance. "You have ruled through fear and cruelty. You swallowed your own children to prevent a prophecy from coming true. But the prophecy is here, Father. I am here. Surrender now. Accept judgment, and perhaps mercy can be shown." Cronus's laughter rolled across the battlefield like an avalanche. "Mercy? You speak to me of mercy, boy? I am the lord of the Titans. I have ruled since before you were born. I am time itself. You are nothing but a child playing with toys the Cyclops made for you. Then let us see," Zeus replied, his voice calm but carrying an edge sharp as his thunderbolt. "Whether the future belongs to time or to justice." And with that, the Titanomachi began. The war lasted 10 years. 10 years of constant battle, of divine powers unleashed without restraint, of the earth itself being reshaped by the conflicts fought upon it. It's difficult for mortal minds to truly comprehend the scale of this war. These weren't human soldiers clashing with swords and spears. These were gods and titans, beings who could level mountains with a gesture, who could redirect rivers, who could shake the foundations of the world. The first clash set the tone for everything that would follow. Zeus hurled his thunderbolt, and the sky lit up as if 1,000 lightning strikes happened simultaneously. The bolt caught a group of Titan warriors, and they were scattered like leaves in a storm, their bodies smoking from the impact. Thunder followed, so loud it could be heard from one end of the earth to the other. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident, and the earth bucked and heaved. Chasms opened up, swallowing Titan warriors whole. The sea, though distant from the battlefield, rose up in massive waves in response to his fury, as if the ocean itself was eager to join the fight. Hades donned his helm of darkness and vanished, reappearing behind Titan lines to sow chaos and confusion. Enemies would suddenly find their commanders falling with no visible attacker, would feel cold breath on their necks, but see nothing when they turned. The psychological warfare was as effective as any physical attack. Hera revealed powers of her own, command over the air and the aspects of heaven, able to call down storms and winds that buffeted the Titan forces. Demeter caused the ground to either spring forth with entangling vines or to turn barren and cracked, making the battlefield itself an enemy. Hestia, though less martially inclined, provided stability, her presence a source of calm and strength for the Olympian forces, a reminder of why they fought. The Titans responded with their own terrible powers, Hyperion brought the full force of daylight to bear, intensifying the sun's heat until the very ground smoked and armor became too hot to touch. Iapetus struck with raw strength, his blows landing like meteor impacts. Crius manipulated the stars themselves, calling down their power in ways that defied understanding. And through it all, Cronus fought with the desperation of a king who sees his reign ending. He wielded his adamantine sickle, the same weapon he'd used to castrate his father, and that blade was deadly even to divine flesh. Time itself seemed to slow around him, his enemies aging years in seconds, becoming weak and old before they could land their blows. The Hecatonchires proved to be Zeus's secret weapons. Each of these massive beings could fight like an army unto themselves. With 100 arms, they could hurl boulders by the hundreds, creating barrages that looked like solid walls of stone flying through the air. The Titans had never faced anything like them, had no defense against beings who could attack from 100 different angles simultaneously. Briareus waded into battle and single-handedly held off waves of Titan soldiers, his many heads allowing him to see attacks from all directions, his many arms creating an impenetrable defense while simultaneously mounting an overwhelming offense. Cottus and Gyges fought with similar effectiveness, and soon the Titans learned to avoid these three at all costs, to try to work around them rather than confront them directly. The landscape became a casualty of the war. Mountains were leveled in the fighting, new ones thrust up from the plains by the clashing of divine powers. Rivers changed course, lakes dried up, forests were burned to ash and then grew back only to be destroyed again. The sky itself seemed torn, clouds hanging perpetually dark and ominous, shot through with constant lightning. Years passed in this brutal stalemate. Neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The Titans had experience and the power of the old order. The Olympians had the righteousness of their cause and superior weapons. They battled back and forth across the world, each victory matched by a defeat, each advance countered by a retreat. The mortal world, if mortals existed yet to know it, must have been a terrifying place. The gods and Titans paid little attention to collateral damage. When Zeus threw his thunderbolt, he didn't care what mountain stood in its path. When Poseidon caused earthquakes, he didn't worry about what might collapse. The world was being reshaped by their conflict, and lesser beings could only hide and pray for the war to end. But slowly, incrementally, the tide began to turn. The Olympians were younger, less bound by the old ways, more adaptable. Zeus proved to be a brilliant strategist, learning from each battle, adjusting tactics, finding weaknesses in the Titan formations. And the Cyclops' weapons continued to give them an edge that the Titans couldn't match. The turning point came in the 10th year of the war. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades coordinated an attack of unprecedented power. Zeus gathered all his strength and hurled not one but a barrage of thunderbolts, filling the sky with lightning, turning day into something brighter and more terrible than any sun. Poseidon struck the earth again and again with his trident, causing quakes that wouldn't stop, that kept buildings collapsing and warriors falling. And Hades moved invisible through the chaos, targeting the Titan commanders, removing them from the battle with ruthless efficiency. The assault was so overwhelming that the Titan forces broke. After 10 years of stalemate, suddenly they were in retreat, falling back toward Mount Othrys. their formations in disarray, their morale shattered. The Olympians pressed their advantage, the hecatontures hurling their mountains worth of boulders, driving the Titans before them. The final battle took place at the foot of Mount Othrys itself. Cronus made his stand there, rallying what remained of his forces for one last desperate defense. He knew that if he fell, the war was over. He knew that prophecy was unfolding despite all his efforts to prevent it, and that knowledge made him more dangerous than he'd ever been. A cornered animal fighting with nothing left to lose. The battle raged with such intensity that later myths would speak of the earth itself screaming. Zeus and Cronus faced each other directly, father against son, old order against new. Cronus swung his sickle, that weapon of castration and betrayal, and Zeus met it with his thunderbolt. The clash of these weapons sent shockwaves radiating outward, knocking down warriors on both sides. They fought with a ferocity born of everything their conflict represented. For Cronus, it was the fight to maintain control, to prove that his rule was right, to escape the fate his father had suffered. For Zeus, it was justice, was freedom for his siblings, was the establishment of a better order. Their battle carried the weight of cosmic significance, and the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. Cronus was strong, experienced, desperate. But Zeus had something his father lacked. He fought not just for himself, but for others. His siblings stood with him, coordinating their attacks. When Cronus forced Zeus back, Poseidon struck from the side. When Cronus turned to face Poseidon, Hades appeared behind him. They fought as a family, as a unit, and Cronus fought alone, even surrounded by his allies. The end, when it came, was swift. Zeus saw his opening. A moment when Cronus overextended with his sickle, leaving himself vulnerable. The thunderbolt flew true, striking the Titan Lord square in the chest. The impact lifted Cronus off his feet, hurling him backward, his weapon flying from his hand. He crashed to the ground, smoke rising from the wound, the smell of burning divine flesh acrid in the air. And just like that, the war was over. With their looter fallen, the remaining Titans surrendered. Some threw down their weapons immediately. Others tried to flee, but were rounded up by the Olympians and their allies. The great battle that had raged for 10 years ended, not with some grand final confrontation, but with an exhausted surrender. Defeated beings acknowledging that they had lost. Now came the question of what to do with the losers. In war, victors get to write history and decide fates. And the Olympians had to determine what would happen to the Titans who had fought against them. Zeus considered executing them, simply ending the Titans' existence to ensure they could never threaten the new order again. But Hades counseled mercy, or at least a mercy of sorts. Kill them, he said, and we become no better than Cronus. We become the tyrants we fought against. So, instead, Zeus decreed a different punishment. The Titans who had fought against them would be imprisoned in Tartarus, that same dark pit where the Cyclopes and Hecatontures had suffered. But this imprisonment would be more secure than any that came before. The bronze gates would be sealed again, yes, but this time with guards that could never be overwhelmed or tricked. The Hecatontures agreed to serve as jailers, their many arms and heads perfect for ensuring no prisoner ever escaped. One by one, the defeated Titans were marched down into Tartarus. Hyperion, who had brought the sun's burning light against the Olympians, descended into darkness. Iapetus, whose strength had nearly turned, the tide of battle multiple times, was chained in the deepest pits. Creus, Coeus, and so many others followed, their pride broken, their age ended. Atlas received a special punishment, one that has echoed through mythology ever since. He had fought particularly fiercely for Cronus, had led many of the Titan forces, and Zeus decided he deserved more than simple imprisonment. Atlas was condemned to hold up the sky itself, to stand at the western edge of the world with the celestial sphere upon his shoulders, bearing that weight for all eternity. It was a punishment that was also crucial, where someone had to hold up the sky, and Atlas's great strength made him ideal for the task. Cronus himself was imprisoned deepest of all, chained in the darkest corner of Tartarus, with bonds that would never break. Some later myths would soften his punishment, suggesting he was eventually released or even came to rule the Elysian fields. But in this moment, he was simply the defeated tyrant, the father who had swallowed his children and paid the price for that crime. With the Titans imprisoned and the war won, Zeus and his siblings stood victorious. They had achieved what the prophecy foretold. They had overthrown the old order. The age of the Titans was over. The age of the Olympians had begun. But victory in war is only the first step. Now came the harder task, building something new, establishing the rules by which this new order would function, dividing the cosmos among themselves, and trying to do better than those who came before. The division of the cosmos. The war was won, but the world was in chaos. 10 years of divine conflict had reshaped the earth, disrupted the natural order, left everything in flux. The Olympians stood among the ruins of the old world and faced the monumental task of creating a new one. And the first question they had to answer was simple in its asking, but complex in its implications. Who would rule what? Zeus, by virtue of being the one who freed his siblings, who organized the resistance, who struck the final blow against Cronus, could have claimed absolute authority. He could have made himself sole ruler, could have become the very thing they had fought against. But Zeus, for all his flaws that would become apparent in later stories, showed wisdom in this moment. He gathered his siblings, those who had fought beside him, who had shared in the victory. Hades, dark and solemn, his helm of darkness now removed. Poseidon, restless and powerful, his trident still crackling with residual energy. Hera, proud and regal, already carrying herself like a queen. Demeter, patient and nurturing, dreaming already of bringing life back to the scarred earth. And Hestia, the eldest, quiet but commanding respect simply by her presence. We fought together, Zeus said to them. We won together. The cosmos is vast, too vast for any one ruler. We should divide it among us, each taking domain over different realms, each ruling their portion, but all working together for the good of the whole. It was, on its face, a reasonable proposal, but it raised immediate questions. How would they divide creation? Who would get which parts? The cosmos, as the Greeks understood it, consisted of 3 great realms: the sky and earth, where most gods and mortals would dwell, the seas that encircled and pervaded the world, and the underworld, where the dead would go. These 3 domains were not equal in their desirability, at least not obviously so. Some versions of the myth suggest they debated the division, each sibling arguing for their preferred realm. Others say they recognized immediately that no argument would satisfy everyone, that any decision made by a committee would leave someone feeling slighted. So they chose to let fate decide. They would draw lots, and whatever each sibling drew, that would be their domain to rule for all eternity. Picture that scene, if you will. Three brothers, each with power enough to reshape reality, standing in a circle with their sisters watching. Perhaps they used marked stones or carved sticks, or some other method of random selection. The exact mechanism doesn't matter. What matters is that each reached into wherever the lots were kept and withdrew their fate. Zeus drew the sky. The moment he held that lot in his hand, thunder rumbled in the distance as if in acknowledgement. The sky and the upper air, the clouds and the storms, the heights where eagles soared and the winds that moved them, all of this would be his domain. He would be the Sky Father, the storm bringer, the one who ruled from the highest peaks and looked down upon the world below. Poseidon drew the sea, and perhaps he smiled when he saw his lot, or perhaps the sea itself smiled, sending waves crashing on distant shores in celebration. All the waters of the world would be his, from the great ocean that encircled everything to the smallest stream, from the deepest trenches to the foam on the beach, from the rivers that carved the land to the springs that bubbled up from unknown sources. The realm of water in all its forms would answer to him. Hades drew the underworld, and if he felt disappointment, he didn't show it. Or perhaps he felt no disappointment at all, for Hades was always different from his brothers, more comfortable with darkness, more accepting of grim necessity. The underworld was vast, containing not just the dead, but the riches buried beneath the earth, the precious metals and gems, the secret places where roots reach deep. It was a realm of power, just different from the others. But what of the earth itself? The actual land where mortals would walk and gods would interact with humanity. The earth was not divided. It belonged to all of them, a shared realm where each could exercise some influence, but none had absolute control. It was neutral territory, the meeting ground of the three brothers' powers and the sisters. Interestingly, they were not given realms to rule in the same way. This speaks to the patriarchal nature of Greek society, even among their gods. But each sister did receive domains of influence, areas of existence over which they held sway. Hestia, the eldest, became goddess of the hearth, of home and family, of the sacred fire that burned in every household and in the temples of the gods. Her domain was smaller in scope than her brothers, but perhaps more essential. For what is civilization without home, without the hearth around which families gather? Demeter became goddess of the harvest, of agriculture, of the cycle of planting and growing and reaping. She would teach humanity how to cultivate the land, would govern the fertility of the earth, would ensure that the seasons turned and crops grew. Her domain touched every mortal who ate bread or drank wine. Hera, Zeus's choice for queen and eventual wife, became goddess of marriage and women, of family bonds and childbirth. She would be queen of Olympus, ruling alongside Zeus, but often at odds with him, a complex relationship that would define much of Greek mythology's drama. With the cosmos divided, Zeus and his siblings set about establishing their seats of power. Zeus chose Mount Olympus as his primary residence and the home of the Olympian court. Olympus was the tallest mountain in Greece, its peak so high that clouds perpetually shrouded its summit. To mortal eyes, the top was invisible, hidden in mist and mystery. But the gods could pierce that veil, could see the magnificent palaces that Zeus caused to be built there. The palaces of Olympus were crafted by Hephaestus, the divine smith who may have been born before the Titanomachy, or may have come after. Sources differ. But whenever he arrived, his skill was unmatched. He built halls of gold and bronze and materials that have no earthly names, structures that defied gravity and logic, that were both impossibly grand and intimately comfortable. Each god received their own palace suited to their nature, connected by paths of clouds and starlight. At the center was Zeus's throne room, the great hall where the Olympians would gather to make decisions affecting mortals and immortals alike. The throne itself was fashioned from some material that shimmered like contained lightning, that seemed solid but also ethereal, that marked anyone who sat in it as supreme among gods. From this throne, Zeus could see all the worlds spread out below, could watch the affairs of mortals and gods, could dispense justice and judgment. Poseidon made his main palace beneath the waves, in a location that mortals could never reach. Imagine a palace in the deepest ocean, where the pressure would crush any mortal, but where gods moved freely. The walls were made of coral and mother of pearl, constantly shifting with the currents, alive with color and movement. Sea creatures of all kinds served as Poseidon's attendants, from tiny fish to massive whales, all acknowledging him as their lord. But Poseidon also maintained a presence on Olympus, for the three brothers and their sisters would gather there regularly to discuss matters of importance. The division of realms didn't mean isolation. They were still family, still connected by bonds of blood and shared victory. Hades' situation was more complicated. His realm, the underworld, was not a place the other gods wanted to visit regularly. It was the destination of the dead, and even gods found it depressing to spend too much time among the shades of the deceased. Hades built his palace there nonetheless, in a vast cavern illuminated by strange phosphorescent stones, a place of majesty and melancholy. Hades rarely left his realm to visit Olympus. Some myths suggest this was his choice, that he preferred the quiet of the underworld to the drama of Olympian politics. Others suggest he was subtly excluded, that the other gods were uncomfortable around the Lord of the Dead, that his presence reminded them of their own mortality, limited though it was. Whatever the reason, Hades became the most solitary of the three brothers, ruling his dark kingdom with fair but inflexible justice. With their palaces established and their domains divided, the Olympians began the work of ordering creation according to their will. Zeus declared himself king of the gods, and while Poseidon and Hades were technically his equals, rulers of their own realms, it was understood that Zeus held a first among equals position. When disputes arose that couldn't be resolved otherwise, Zeus's word would be final. When the gods gathered in council, Zeus would preside. This wasn't tyranny, or at least it wasn't supposed to be. Zeus didn't rule by fear as Cronus had. He ruled, ideally, through wisdom and justice, through building consensus when possible, and making firm decisions when necessary. He saw himself as the guardian of order, the one who kept chaos at bay, the king whose authority prevented the kind of destructive conflicts that had marked the Titanomachy. But Zeus was not perfect, and his rule would not be perfect. Already, seeds were being planted for future conflicts, future stories that would complicate this idealized vision of just rule. Zeus's relationship with Hera would become notoriously strained. His numerous affairs with goddesses and mortals would cause endless drama. His sometimes arbitrary decisions would lead to resentment and rebellion. But in this moment, in the aftermath of victory and the establishment of the new order, there was hope. The Titans were defeated. The cosmos was divided fairly. The gods had their domains. The world could finally know peace after 10 years of war. Or so they thought. Zeus as king, powers and symbols. Zeus stood upon Olympus's heights, his thunderbolt in hand, and looked out over all creation. He had ascended from hidden infant to king of the gods, and now the full weight of that position settled upon his shoulders. But what exactly did it mean to be Zeus? What powers did he command? What symbols represented his authority? Let's explore the many facets of the god, who would become the most recognized figure in the Greek pantheon. The thunderbolt was, of course, Zeus's primary symbol and weapon. We have discussed its forging by the Cyclopes, but understanding Zeus requires understanding just how central the thunderbolt was to his identity. It wasn't simply a weapon he carried. It was an extension of himself, a manifestation of his divine nature. When Zeus wielded the thunderbolt, he controlled the storm itself. Thunder wasn't just sound. It was the voice of the god, his way of expressing rage or warning, of showing approval or disapproval. Every clap of thunder that rolled across the sky was Zeus speaking, whether he formed actual words or simply made his presence known. Lightning, in Greek understanding, was divine fire, fundamentally different from earthly flame. It came from the sky, from Zeus's realm, and it carried purifying as well as destructive properties. To be struck by lightning could be seen as being touched by Zeus himself, for good or ill. Locations where lightning struck became sacred, marked by the god's attention. But Zeus's control over weather extended beyond just lightning and thunder. He commanded the winds, calling them forth, or calming them as needed. Sailors prayed to Zeus Oreos, Zeus of the favorable wind, asking him to grant them safe passage. Farmers looked to Zeus Umbrios, Zeus of rain, to water their crops at the right times. Drought or flood, calm or storm, all fell under Zeus's purview. This power over weather made Zeus essential to mortal survival. Ancient agrarian societies lived and died by the weather. Too much rain and crops rotted in the fields. Too little and they withered. Storms could destroy a year's work in minutes. Fair weather could make the difference between prosperity and famine. To control weather was to control life itself, and Zeus held that power. Beyond weather, Zeus was also god of the sky in a broader sense. The bright blue of a clear day was his domain. The clouds that drifted lazily on summer afternoons moved at his sufferance. Birds that soared through the air did so in his realm. Everything above the earth but below the stars belonged to Zeus. The eagle became Zeus's sacred bird, a fitting choice. Eagles soar higher than any other bird, possess keen sight that can spot prey from impossible distances, and strike with speed and power when they attack. All these qualities reflected Zeus's own nature. The eagle became his messenger and symbol, appearing in myths to deliver Zeus's will, or to carry out his commands. To see an eagle was to be reminded of Zeus watching from above. Zeus was also deeply associated with the oak tree, particularly at his oracle at Dodona, one of the oldest religious sites in Greece. Priests and priestesses at Dodona would interpret the rustling of oak leaves as messages from Zeus. Why the oak? perhaps because of its strength, its longevity, its deep roots and broad canopy. The oak endures storms that fell other trees, lives for centuries, provides shelter and food, all fitting attributes for the king of gods. But Zeus was more than weather and nature. He held the title Zeus Xenios, Zeus the protector of guests and the hospitality. In ancient Greece, hospitality was sacred, a duty enforced by divine law. To turn away a traveler who sought shelter was an offense against Zeus himself. To harm a guest under your protection was among the greatest crimes. Zeus watched over all travelers, all strangers, ensuring they received proper treatment. This extended to supplicants as well. Zeus Hykesios protected those who sought sanctuary, who came before others asking for mercy or aid. The act of supplication was sacred, and Zeus ensured that those who properly supplicated received at least consideration of their plea. To reject a supplicant without hearing them was to offend Zeus. Zeus also held the role of keeper of oaths. Zeus Horkios oversaw all promises, all vows, all contracts made between individuals or nations. To swear an oath by Zeus was the most binding commitment one could make. To break such an oath was to invite Zeus's wrath. This made him essential to commerce, diplomacy, marriage, all the agreements that held society together. Perhaps most importantly, Zeus was seen as the god of justice, Zeus Dike. He represented the natural law, the right order of things, the principle that actions have consequences, and that truth should prevail. This wasn't justice in a modern legal sense, but something more cosmic. Zeus embodied the idea that the universe had rules, that there was a proper way for things to be, and that violations of that order would ultimately be corrected. This role as cosmic judge meant that Zeus was often called upon to settle disputes, both among gods and among mortals. When arguments couldn't be resolved by the parties involved, Zeus would render judgment. His decisions weren't always popular, weren't always what we might consider fair by modern standards, but they carried the weight of divine authority. Zeus's physical form, as described in various myths and depicted in countless artworks, reflected his status. He was typically imagined as a mature man, not young but not elderly, in the prime of powerful adulthood. He had a full beard, long hair, and a commanding presence that made his divinity obvious. His body was perfectly proportioned, strong without being brutish, conveying both physical power and royal dignity. When he manifested in his full divine glory, mortals couldn't bear to look at him directly. The radiance, the power, the sheer presence of the god was too overwhelming for mortal senses. This became important in several myths, most notably in the story of Semele, who asked Zeus to appear to her in his true form and was incinerated by the experience. But Zeus could also shapeshift while maintaining his essence. This ability to change form was one of his most famous powers, used in numerous myths for various purposes. He could become a bull, a swan, a shower of gold, an eagle, even a cuckoo bird. These transformations weren't illusions. Zeus actually became these things, while remaining fundamentally himself. The reasons for these transformations varied. Sometimes Zeus used them to approach mortals who would have been overwhelmed by his true form. Sometimes he used them to seduce, to trick, to spy, or simply to move through the mortal world unnoticed. This shape-shifting ability spoke to Zeus's essential nature as a god who could be anything, who wasn't bound by the limitations of a single form. Zeus also possessed the gift of prophecy, though he rarely used it directly. He knew the fates, understood destiny in ways that other gods did not. This knowledge sometimes informed his decisions, sometimes constrained them. Section 8. Zeus's relationships and children. To understand the reign of Zeus is to understand the genealogy of the Greek cosmos. The king of the gods did not merely rule through edicts and thunderbolts, he ruled through procreation. His romantic entanglements, vast, varied, and often violent, were not simply the dalliances of a lustful deity, though the poets certainly painted them as such. They were acts of cosmic integration. By uniting with specific goddesses, Zeus absorbed their essential spheres of influence into his own administration. By uniting with mortals, he bridged the gap between the ethereal and the earthly, creating a lineage of heroes destined to protect mankind and defend the divine order. Zeus was the great patriarch, the generative force of the universe. His history of unions can be read as a map of Greek theology, moving from the abstract forces of nature to the civilized structures of the Olympian court, and finally to the muddy, blood-soaked soil of humanity. The 7 divine consorts, Hesiod, the ancient poet who cataloged the gods, lists 7 canonical wives of Zeus before his final permanent marriage to Hera. Each marriage marked a stage in the stabilization of his power. 1. Metis, wisdom, the internal advisor. His first wife was Metis, the oceanid tightness of wisdom, cunning, and prudence. It was Metis who had helped Zeus free his siblings by administering the emetic to Cronus. She was his intellectual equal, perhaps even his superior in foresight. However, Gaia and Uranus prophesied that Metis would bear a daughter equal to her father in strength, and then a son who would overthrow him. Haunted by the cycle of succession that destroyed his father and grandfather, Zeus took a drastic, terrifying step. He did not banish Metis. He consumed her. He swallowed wisdom whole. This was the pivotal moment of his reign. By internalizing Metis, Zeus ensured that he would never be outwitted. He became the embodiment of Mitieda, counselor. The result of this union was the most spectacular birth in mythology. After suffering a splitting headache, Zeus had Hephaestus, or Prometheus, strike his skull with an axe. From the wound sprang Athena, fully grown and clad in armor. Athena was the perfect daughter, possessing the strategic brilliance of Metis and the power of Zeus, yet fiercely loyal only to her father. Through her, Zeus held the keys to war, strategy, and handicraft. 2. Themis, divine law. The architect of order having assimilated wisdom, Zeus next married Themis, the tightness of divine law and custom. This union was political and philosophical. It signified that Zeus's reign would not be based on raw, chaotic strength like the Titans, but on Themis, right order. Their children were the Horai, the seasons, hours, Eunomia, order, Dike, justice, and Irene, peace. These deities regulated the passage of time and the functioning of society. More terrifyingly, Themis bore him the Moirai, the Fates, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. By fathering the Fates in some traditions, in others they are children of night, Zeus aligned his will with destiny itself, asserting that his rule was the inevitable structure of the universe. 3. Eurynome, grace, the softening of power. To rule effectively, power needs beauty. Zeus united with Eurynome, an Oceanid, who bore the Charites, the Graces, Aglaia, splendor, Euphrosyne, mirth, and Thalia, good cheer. These daughters were the antithesis of the monsters Zeus fought. They brought joy to the feasts of Olympus and charm to the lives of men. They represented the cultural refinement that Zeus sought to establish over the barbarism of the old world. 4. Demeter, the earth, the cycle of life. With his sister Demeter, the goddess of grain and harvest, Zeus fathered Persephone. This union tied the sky father to the earth mother, ensuring the agricultural fertility of the world. However, this relationship would lead to one of the greatest crises of Zeus's reign: the abduction of Persephone by Hades. Zeus, ever the pragmatist, allowed the abduction to secure an alliance with the underworld, nearly causing the starvation of humanity when Demeter grieved. It showcased Zeus's role as the arbitrator between the desires of his powerful siblings. 5. Mnemosyne, memory. The art of civilization, realizing that a glorious reign means nothing if it is forgotten. Zeus visited the Titaness Mnemosyne in Pieria. He slept with her for 9 consecutive nights. The result was the 9 Muses, the goddesses of the arts, history, and science. This was a profound theological statement. Civilization requires memory. Without the Muses, there is no poetry to praise the gods, no history to record the laws, no astronomy to chart the heavens. By fathering the Muses, Zeus ensured his own immortality in the minds of men. 6. Leto, the hidden. The twins of light. Leto, a Titaness of modesty and motherhood, bore Zeus's most brilliant children, Apollo and Artemis. This union was fraught with difficulty, as Hera's jealousy had begun to manifest in full force. Hera banned Leto from giving birth on terra firma, forcing her to the floating island of Delos. Apollo and Artemis completed the Olympian pantheon. Apollo brought music, prophecy, healing, and the sun's clarity. Artemis brought the hunt, the protection of the wild, and the moon's mystery. Through them, Zeus extended his reach into every aspect of light and wilderness. 7. Hera, the queen, the sacred marriage. Finally, Zeus married his sister, Hera. This was the Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage. Hera was the goddess of marriage, women, and childbirth. She was majestic, beautiful, and possessing a will of iron. Their union produced Ares, war, Hebe, youth, and Eileithyia, childbirth. Hephaestus is often considered born of Hera alone, in retaliation for the birth of Athena. The marriage of Zeus and Hera was the stormy center of the Greek cosmos. It was a relationship defined by power struggles, infidelity, and reconciliation. Hera was not a submissive wife. She was a queen who demanded respect. Her jealousy was not merely petty emotion. It was the divine defense of the institution of marriage. Every time Zeus strayed, he threatened the sanctity of the bond over which Hera presided. Their conflict drove the narrative of the universe, Zeus representing the expansive, wandering, fertilizing force, and Hera representing the cohesive, domestic, binding force. The mortal affairs, bridging the worlds. If the divine marriages were about ordering the cosmos, the mortal affairs were about protecting it. Zeus knew that the age of gods would eventually wane. To ensure the safety of humanity and the worship of the gods, he needed agents on Earth, beings with divine potential but mortal limitations. He needed heroes. Zeus did not merely seduce mortal women. He visited them in forms that reflected the nature of the power he wished to bestow, or the challenge he wished to overcome. Danae and the Golden Shower, when King Acrisius locked his daughter Danae in a bronze tower to prevent a prophecy that her son would kill him. He thought he could defy fate. Zeus proved that the divine cannot be walled out. he transformed into a shower of golden rain, pouring through the roof to impregnate her. From this union came Perseus, the slayer of Medusa. Perseus was the archetype of the monster slayer, a hero who used divine gifts, Hermes' sandals, Hades' helm, to rid the world of chaotic beasts. He was the proof that Zeus's blood could elevate a mortal to greatness. Europa and the White Bull. Zeus fell in love with the Phoenician princess Europa. To approach her without frightening her, he transformed into a magnificent white bull, gentle and smelling of flowers. When she climbed onto his back, he swam out to sea, carrying her to Crete. This abduction was the mythical foundation of the continent of Europe. Their children included Minos and Rhadamanthus, who became kings of wisdom and law, and eventually the judges of the dead in the underworld. Through Europa, Zeus established the concept of divinely ordained kingship and law on the island of Crete, the cradle of Greek civilization. Leda and the swan in one of his most enigmatic transformations. Zeus appeared to Leda, queen of Sparta, as a swan fleeing from an eagle. Leda protected the bird, and in that form, Zeus seduced her. Leda laid 2 eggs. From them hatched Helen of Troy and Polydeuces, Pollux, children of Zeus, and Clytemnestra and Castor, children of her husband Tyndareus. This union sowed the seeds of the Trojan War. Helen possessed a beauty that was weaponized by fate, while Pollux represented the bond of brotherhood. The swan symbolized a beauty that was both fragile and dangerous, Semele and the fire of divinity. The affair with Semele, a Theban princess, was a tragedy of incompatibility. Hera, in disguise, tricked Semele into asking Zeus to reveal himself in his full glory, just as he appeared to Hera on Olympus. Zeus, bound by an oath on the river Styx, had to comply. No mortal can withstand the raw, unshielded presence of the storm god. Semele was incinerated by his lightning. However, Zeus snatched the unborn child from her womb and sewed him into his own thigh to finish the gestation. Thus was born Dionysus. Because he was born from Zeus's own body, Dionysus was a god, not a demigod. He was the god of wine, madness, and ecstasy, a chaotic force that Zeus allowed into the pantheon to balance the rigid order of Apollo, the ultimate hero, Heracles, of all his children. Divine or mortal, none was more important to Zeus's grand design than Heracles, Hercules. Zeus needed a warrior. A prophecy stated that the Olympians could not defeat the giants, Gigantes, earthborn monsters destined to rise against the gods, without the help of a mortal hero. Zeus planned the birth of Heracles with military precision. He chose Alcmene, a woman of the lineage of Perseus, for her strength and virtue. He disguised himself as her husband, Amphitryon, while the man was away at war. To ensure the child would be endowed with maximum vitality, Zeus extended the night to 3 times its normal length, spending the extra hours conceiving the ultimate champion. Heracles was born with strength that rivaled the gods, but his name, ironically meaning the glory of Hera, signaled his lifelong burden. He was the living embodiment of Zeus's infidelity, and Hera hated him with a pristine, focused fury. Yet, Zeus loved Heracles above all others. He watched as Heracles strangled Hera's snakes in his cradle. He watched him endure the 12 labors, cleansing the world of the Nemean lion, the Hydra, and other primordial terrors. Heracles was Zeus's agent of civilization, clearing the wild places so that humanity could thrive. When the giants finally attacked Olympus, piling mountain upon mountain, it was Heracles and his bow fighting alongside Zeus and his lightning that saved the gods. Zeus's foresight in fathering a mortal defender was vindicated. Upon Heracles' death, Zeus granted him the ultimate honor, apotheosis. Heracles was raised to Olympus to live as a god, the only hero to fully bridge the gap between earth and sky. The wrath of Hera, the divine counterbalance. It is impossible to discuss Zeus's relationships without addressing the antagonist in nearly every story, Hera. Modern interpretations often reduce Hera to a nagging, jealous shrew. This creates a misunderstanding of Greek theology. Hera was the goddess of authority and the guardian of oaths. Every time Zeus slept with a mortal, he was not just hurting Hera's feelings. He was destabilizing the hierarchy of Olympus and insulting the dignity of the Queen of Heaven. Hera's jealousy was the narrative engine of Greek mythology. Without Hera's interference, Heracles would have been a simple king, not a monster slayer who traveled the world. Io would not have wandered the earth, leading to the lineage of Egypt and Phoenicia. The Trojan War might have ended in a stalemate. Hera punished the women and the children, for she could not punish Zeus directly. She turned Io into a cow and sent a gadfly to sting her across continents. She tricked Semele into her death. She delayed the birth of Heracles so that his cousin Eurystheus would become king instead. She turned Callisto into a bear, who later became the Ursa Major constellation. Zeus often tolerated Hera's rage, perhaps out of guilt, or perhaps because he understood that struggle was necessary to forge heroes. A hero with an easy life is no hero at all. By persecuting Zeus's children, Hera inadvertently tested them, hardened them, and proved their worthiness. There were times, however, when the conflict turned violent. When Hera sent a storm to blow Heracles off course, Zeus hung her from the heavens by golden chains, with anvils tied to her feet. It was a brutal reminder of who held the ultimate power. Yet, they always reconciled. They were the two poles of the universe, the expansive, creative force, and the restrictive, ordering force. They could not exist without one another. The legacy of the lineage. In the end, Zeus's promiscuity was the mechanism by which the Greek world was populated and organized. Look at the night sky, the great bear, Callisto, the twins, Pollux, the bull, the form he took for Europa, the swan, Leda, the eagle, his messenger. The stars themselves were a catalog of his affairs. Look at the earth. The cities of Thebes, Argos, Crete, and Sparta all claimed descent from Zeus. The kings ruled by divine right, because they traced their bloodlines back to one of his distinct unions. Zeus fathered law, peace, and justice to rule society. He fathered the muses to inspire art. He fathered Apollo and Artemis to govern nature. He fathered Hermes to connect the worlds. And he fathered the heroes to protect it all. He was not merely a ruler sitting on a throne. He was the biological and spiritual ancestor of the reality the Greeks experienced. Every aspect of existence, from the bloom of a flower, Persephone, to the stroke of a sword, Ares, from the brilliance of a thought, Athena, to the madness of a drunken revel, Dionysus, was kin to Zeus. He was the father in the truest, most comprehensive sense, the one from whom all life, order, and struggle flowed. The challenge of Typhon, the final test piece, it turned out, was more fragile than Zeus had hoped. He had defeated the Titans, imprisoned them in Tartarus, established his rule on Mount Olympus, and created what he thought was a stable system of divine governance. He should have known better. should have remembered that in the ancient world, in the realm of gods and primordial forces, stability was always temporary, peace always provisional. There were older powers than the Olympians, forces that predated even the Titans, and one of these forces was very, very angry. Gaia, the earth herself, had watched her children, first the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires, then the Titans, imprisoned, cast down, denied their freedom and power. She had supported Zeus initially, had helped Rhea hide him, had seen in the young god a chance for justice and a better order. But when Zeus cast Cronus and the defeated Titans into Tartarus, when he bound them in unbreakable chains and posted eternal guards to ensure they would never escape, Gaia felt betrayed. These were her children, regardless of their crimes. Cronus might have been paranoid and cruel, but he was still Gaia's son. The Titans might have fought against the new order, but they were still her offspring, and seeing them imprisoned in the deepest pit of existence, suffering in darkness and cold for all eternity, filled Gaia with a rage that shook the foundations of the world. She could not raise an army as Cronus had done. The Titans were imprisoned, the Olympians too strong, the younger gods too firmly established in their power. She needed something else, something more fundamental. A champion who could challenge Zeus on terms that negated the Olympians' advantages of numbers and organization. She needed a weapon, a creature of such devastating power that it could face the entire Olympian pantheon and have a chance of winning. So Gaia descended into Tartarus itself, to its deepest reaches where her consort Tartarus dwelt, in his primordial darkness. And there, in that place where reality grew thin and strange, Gaia and Tartarus conceived one final child, a being that would be their ultimate weapon against the Olympians. They called this creature Typhon, the storm giant, the father of monsters, and he was born into the world ready for war. Typhon was vast beyond comprehension. His size varied depending on who told the story. Some said his head touched the stars, others that he was merely as tall as a mountain, but all agreed he was immense, dwarfing even the largest of the Olympians. His body was humanoid from the waist up, massively muscled, but below the waist, he was all serpent, with coils that could wrap around mountains and a tail that could level cities with a casual swipe. But his most terrifying feature was his heads. From his shoulders sprouted not one head, but 100, each one a dragon's head, with fangs like swords and eyes that burned with hellfire. These heads could breathe fire, could speak in 100 voices simultaneously, could attack from 100 directions at once. When all 100 heads roared together, the sound was like the end of the world, like reality itself screaming. His hands were not hands, but clusters of serpents, each one venomous, each one capable of independent movement. His wings, when spread, could blot out the sun, could summon hurricanes with their beating. He was a living nightmare, a concentration of everything terrible and powerful in the cosmos, given form and purpose by Gaia's rage and Tartarus's darkness. Typhon emerged from the depths and began his march toward Mount Olympus, and his approach was heralded by signs that filled even the Olympians with dread. The sky darkened, not with natural clouds, but with a wrongness that made it hard to breathe. Earthquakes rippled across the land, not the controlled tremors Poseidon could summon, but wild, destructive shaking that toppled mountains and opened chasms in the earth. And from the distance came that terrible roar, 100 voices screaming defiance and hunger and rage. The gods on Mount Olympus felt Typhon's approach, and for many of them, their first instinct was not to fight but to flee. This was not like the Titanomacy, where they faced opponents they understood, opponents who could be defeated through strategy and persistence. Typhon was something else, something more fundamental and more terrifying. He was the Earth's wrath made flesh, and against such a force, what chance did even gods have? One by one, many of the Olympians transformed themselves into animals and fled to Egypt, where they hid among the mortal temples, hoping Typhon would not follow them so far. Apollo became a crow. Hermes transformed into an ibis. Artemis became a cat. Ares chose the form of a fish. Even some of Zeus's siblings considered fleeing, though in the end, only Zeus and Athena remained steadfast on Olympus, refusing to abandon their newly won home. They knew that fleeing would not solve the problem. It would only delay the inevitable. Zeus stood at the peak of Mount Olympus, the thunderbolt clasped tightly in his hand, his eyes fixed on the approaching horror. His heart was heavy, not with fear, but with the solemn weight of his responsibility. He was king. He could not falter now. This was the ultimate test of his reign, a challenge to the very foundation of the cosmos. When Typhon finally reached Olympus, the battle began. It was not a war of armies, but a duel between the king of the gods and the ultimate monster. Zeus unleashed his thunderbolts, not just a few, but a continuous torrent of pure divine energy, each bolt a spear of concentrated fury. The sky above Olympus became a blinding canvas of light, thunder reverberating through the very fabric of reality. But Typhon, immense and terrifying, met the assault head-on. His 100 heads breathed fire, spewing molten rock and searing gas that turned the air to superheated steam. His serpent coils wrapped around mountains, tearing them from their roots, and he hurled these colossal masses of earth at Zeus with unimaginable strength. The earth groaned beneath their feet. The seas boiled. The cosmos itself seemed to hold its breath as these two colossal powers clashed. Zeus fought with a ferocity born of necessity, knowing that the fate of the universe rested on his shoulders. But Typhon was a primordial force, born of Gaia's deepest anger, and he was nearly unstoppable. In a terrifying moment, Typhon managed to close the distance. His serpentine hands, each a cluster of venomous vipers, grappled with Zeus, and his 100 dragon heads snapped and bit. Typhon's sheer brute force overwhelmed Zeus. The monster tore Zeus's sinews from his body, severing the tendons in his hands and feet, rendering the king of gods helpless. A great cry of triumph ripped from Typhon's 100 throats as Zeus, utterly incapacitated, fell to the ground. Typhon snatched up the fallen god, carried him far away from Olympus, and imprisoned him in a cave in Cilicia. The sinews he had torn from Zeus, the very source of his strength, Typhon entrusted to his monstrous sister Delphine to guard carefully. For a brief, terrible time, it seemed that Typhon had won. The new age of the Olympians was over before it had truly begun. But Zeus was not without allies, even in his defeat. Hermes, the clever messenger god who had fled to Egypt, realized the gravity of the situation. He knew that if Zeus remained crippled, all was lost. Risking everything, Hermes, accompanied by Egypen, a goat-footed god who played the syrinx, a type of flute, bravely entered Typhon's cave. Using cunning and music, Hermes lured Delphine into a trance, and together they managed to retrieve Zeus's sinews. With the help of some sympathetic nymphs, the sinews were reattached, and slowly, agonizingly, Zeus's strength began to return. Once restored, Zeus wasted no time. He returned to the fray with a renewed, terrible resolve. The second clash with Typhon was even more ferocious than the first. Zeus, now fully armed with his thunderbolts and his restored power, pursued Typhon across the world. The monster fled, his vast body creating chasms and ravines wherever he dragged his coils. They fought over Thrace, where Typhon was said to have bled profusely, forming the Hemus Mountains, meaning bloody mountains. Then the chase continued to Sicily. Zeus, gathering all his remaining power, unleashed a final, overwhelming barrage of thunderbolts. Each bolt was a mountain-shattering blow, and Typhon, weakened by the prolonged battle, slowly began to give way. With a final, colossal effort, Zeus hurled Mount Etna itself onto the monstrous Typhon, trapping him beneath its immense weight. There, in the fiery depths beneath the earth, Typhon remains to this day. His struggles to escape cause the earthquakes that shake the world, and his fiery breath erupts from the volcano's peak, creating the lava and ash of Mount Etna. The defeat of Typhon was a definitive victory, a true test of Zeus's might and leadership. It proved once and for all that Zeus was indeed worthy of his throne, capable of defending the cosmos against even its most ancient and terrible threats. The Gigantomachy, war with the earthborn giants. Even after Typhon's defeat, Gaia was not appeased. Her anger still festered, and she longed to see her Olympian grandchildren overthrown. So, from the blood of Uranus that had fallen on her during his castration, Gaia brought forth a new race of beings, the Gigantes, the giants. These were not the shapeless horrors of Typhon, but vast, powerful humanoids, often depicted with serpent-like legs, embodying brute strength and a fierce desire to avenge their Titan kin. The Gigantes were immense, with shaggy hair and beards, and skin as tough as dragon scales. They were born specifically to challenge the Olympians. But an ancient prophecy foretold that the giants could not be killed by gods alone. A mortal hero had to fight alongside the Olympians to defeat them. This prophecy became crucial to Zeus's strategy. Gaia raised her giant children in the fields of Phlegra, or Pallene, a place known for its volcanic activity and raw, untamed power. When they were ready, the giants launched their assault on Mount Olympus. Their plan was audacious. They would pile mountains upon mountains, Ossa upon Pelion, or Pelion upon Ossa, to create a stairway to the heavens, an impossibly vast ladder to reach the Olympians' domain. The Olympian gods, having faced Typhon, now understood the nature of primordial threats. They prepared for war with grim determination. Zeus, remembering the prophecy, quickly sought out the mortal hero Heracles, his own mighty son, by the mortal Alcmena. Heracles was already renowned for his superhuman strength and unparalleled skill in battle, and his aid would be indispensable. The Gigantomachy, the War of the Giants, was a spectacle of cosmic violence. The giants, wielding immense rocks, uprooted trees, and even entire islands, charged up the slopes of Olympus. The air thrummed with the clash of divine power against primordial might. Zeus, once again at the forefront, rained down his thunderbolts, splitting the earth and shattering mountains that the giants attempted to hurl. Each flash of lightning illuminated scenes of incredible combat, Porphyrion, one of the most powerful giants, lunged directly at Hera, intending to carry her off, but Zeus intervened, striking him with a thunderbolt. Heracles then finished him with an arrow, fulfilling the prophecy. Alcyoneus, another formidable giant, was immortal as long as he fought in his homeland of Pallene. Heracles, guided by Athena, dragged him out of his sacred land, where he finally succumbed to Heracles' arrow. Enceladus attacked Athena, who, with her spear and aegis, the goatskin shield given to her by Zeus, often adorned with the head of Medusa, fought him back. In a climactic move, Athena threw the entire island of Sicily onto him, trapping him beneath Mount Etna. Sometimes he is linked to Etna's eruptions, alongside Typhon, or as the source of a different volcanic region. Polybotes pursued Poseidon across the seas. Poseidon, with a mighty swing of his trident, broke off a piece of the island of Kos and flung it onto Polybotes, burying him beneath the newly formed island of Nisseros. Other giants fell to the combined might of the Olympians and Heracles. Dionysus fought with his thyrsus, a fennel-stalk staff wrapped in ivy and tipped with a pine cone. Hephaestus used his molten metal, Artemis her arrows, and Apollo his bow. Each god fought with their unique powers, but Heracles was always there, providing the mortal touch needed for the final blow. The Gigantomachy was a grueling war, but it was ultimately shorter and more decisive than the Titanomachy. With the aid of Heracles and their collective divine power, the Olympians systematically defeated the giants, burying many of them under mountains and islands across the world. The defeat of the giants further solidified Zeus's reign. It proved that the new order of Olympus was not just powerful enough to overthrow the old, but strong enough to defend itself against even the Earth's primal rage. The Olympians had faced their greatest challenges and emerged victorious, establishing their unchallenged dominion over the cosmos. Other threats and maintaining order, and while the Gigantomachy and Typhon's rebellion were Zeus's most significant external challenges, his long reign was punctuated by various other threats and trials, both from within the divine family and from the mortal realm. These constant tests refined his leadership and shaped the Olympian order. Internal challenges. Zeus, despite being king, did not rule a perfectly harmonious family. His siblings, particularly Hera, often challenged his authority or schemed against him. Hera, ever jealous of Zeus's many affairs and his supreme power, frequently plotted against him and his offspring. On one famous occasion, Hera, along with Poseidon and Apollo, attempted to overthrow Zeus by binding him in unbreakable chains while he slept. The gods rejoiced, thinking they had finally usurped his throne. However, Thetis, a sea nymph, quickly summoned the Hecatomchire Briareus, who with his 100 hands easily unbound Zeus. This rebellion was swiftly crushed, with Zeus hanging Hera from the sky, with anvils tied to her feet as punishment, and humbling Poseidon and Apollo by forcing them to serve a mortal king for a year. These internal squabbles, though often disruptive, ultimately reinforced Zeus's ultimate authority and the futility of challenging him. Mortal hubris and defiance. Zeus also faced challenges from the mortal world, often in the form of human hubris, an excessive pride or defiance of the gods. Figures like Salmoneus, who impersonated Zeus by riding in a chariot and throwing flaming torches, demanding worship, met a swift and fiery end by Zeus's thunderbolt. Ixion, a mortal king who dared to lust after Hera, was eternally punished by being bound to a fiery, ever-spinning wheel in Tartarus. Lycaon, a king who tested Zeus's omnipotence by serving him human flesh, was transformed into a wolf, showcasing Zeus's wrath against those who violated sacred laws like hospitality. These interventions reinforced Zeus's role as the enforcer of justice and moral order in both the divine and mortal realms. How Zeus maintained order. Zeus's enduring reign as king of the gods was not solely due to his formidable power. It was a complex blend of various strategies and inherent qualities. Unparalleled strength and the thunderbolt. At the core of Zeus's authority was his immense power, symbolized by his thunderbolt. This weapon served as an undeniable deterrent against open rebellion. Its raw, destructive force was a clear message that ultimate cosmic power resided within strategic alliances and prophecy. Zeus consistently used prophecy and cunning to his advantage. He learned from his predecessors' mistakes. Uranus and Cronus were overthrown because they feared prophecy. Zeus used it. His alliance with Medes, his mother Rhea's wisdom, and securing the aid of the Cyclopes, Hecatoncheires, and later Heracles, demonstrated his strategic brilliance and ability to build coalitions. Establishment of justice and law, Themis. Unlike Cronus, who ruled through paranoia, Zeus established a system based on universal laws and justice, Themis. He became the protector of oaths, Zeus Horkios, hospitality, Zeus Xenios, and the moral order. This gave his rule legitimacy and a higher purpose beyond mere brute force. Delegation and shared governance. Rather than hoarding all power, Zeus distributed domains among his siblings and later his children. By drawing lots for their realms, sky, sea, underworld, and sharing Olympus, he fostered a sense of partnership and shared responsibility, minimizing internal resentment and creating a more stable, albeit sometimes fractious, ruling council, symbolism and ritual. The eagle, the oak tree, and the various titles he acquired, e.g. Zeus Olympios, Zeus Panhellenios, helped create a powerful symbolic framework for his rule, connecting him to the highest aspirations of both gods and mortals. Festivals like the Olympic Games further solidified his preeminent position, adaptability, and learning. Zeus learned from the failures of Uranus and Cronus. He avoided their pitfalls of fear-driven tyranny and self-isolating paranoia. He understood the need for evolution in leadership and demonstrated a capacity to adapt to new challenges. Divine councils and feasts. By regularly gathering the gods on Olympus for councils and feasts, Zeus created a sense of community and a forum for discussion. While he held final authority, the act of consulting and feasting together helped integrate the diverse personalities and powers of the Olympians into a cohesive, albeit dynamic family. Through these trials and methods, Zeus transformed a cosmos ravaged by generational conflict into a more ordered, albeit still volatile realm. He proved himself not just a powerful warrior, but a cunning strategist, a wise ruler, and the ultimate enforcer of cosmic justice, earning his place as the eternal king of the gods. And as he watched over his domain from the cloud-shrouded peaks of Olympus, the thunder in his voice and the lightning in his hand were constant reminders of his enduring power and unwavering authority, ensuring that the age of the Olympians, his age, would prevail for untold eons. Now, as the echoes of these ancient battles fade and the cosmic order settles into its majestic rhythm, let your own world slow down. Allow the images of these mighty gods and their epic struggles to drift away. leaving behind only the gentle calm of understanding and the quiet promise of rest. Let your breath deepen, your body relax, as you journey deeper into peaceful slumber. And so, dear listener, our long journey through the foundational myths of the ancient world comes to its triumphant close. The thunder has faded, the cosmic battles have stilled, and the new order, forged in defiance and maintained with unyielding power, has settled into its majestic rhythm. Zeus, the bright-eyed child hidden in a Cretan cave, now sits firmly on his throne atop Mount Olympus, the eternal king. His reign a testament to courage, cunning, and the relentless march of destiny. The legacy of Zeus is immeasurable, stretching far beyond the cloud-shrouded peak of Olympus. His rule did not merely replace Cronus's, it fundamentally reshaped the cosmos, where the Titans ruled through an older, more chaotic, and often brutal power. Zeus established an order grounded, however imperfectly, in law and justice. He was the protector of oaths, the guardian of hospitality, and the ultimate enforcer of balance in the universe. It was under his watch that the gods found their defined roles, that the delicate equilibrium between chaos and order was maintained, and that the world as the ancient Greeks knew it came into being. His influence permeated every aspect of Greek life and thought. He was the patron of kings and the protector of the common person, the judge whose wisdom could be sought at Dodona, the inspiration for athletes competing at Olympia. Every thunderclap, every flash of lightning was a reminder of his power and his presence. His stories, filled with passion, power, and often perplexing decisions, served as moral tales, cautionary warnings, and profound explorations of human and divine nature. The intricate tapestry of Greek mythology, with its heroes, monsters, and countless divine interventions, all spun out from the central thread of Zeus's reign and his sprawling family. The meaning of his myths, too, is as vast and complex as the sky he commanded. At its heart, Zeus's story is a profound exploration of succession, of the breaking of destructive cycles. His father, Cronus, repeated the violence of his own father, Uranus, by imprisoning his children out of fear. But Zeus, though he overthrew his father, chose a different path. He imprisoned Cronus, yes, but he did not kill him. He established a system of shared governance among his siblings, rather than ruling as a solitary tyrant. This choice, this subtle deviation from the pattern of endless, brutal generational conflict, was a pivotal moment in mythological history, symbolizing a shift towards a more evolved, albeit still flawed, form of cosmic order. His myths also speak to the perpetual struggle between brute force and cunning intelligence, between primal power and strategic wisdom. Zeus's victory wasn't just due to his thunderbolt. It was a result of Rhea's cunning, Medus's wisdom, Prometheus's foresight, and his own ability to unite diverse allies and wield them effectively. It is a reminder that leadership requires more than just strength. It demands wisdom, adaptability, and the capacity to inspire loyalty. And finally, Zeus's tales, with all their dramatic turns, their personal failings and cosmic triumphs, reflect the messy, magnificent truth of existence itself. They remind us that even the most powerful beings can be imperfect, that destiny can be shaped by choice, and that from the deepest darkness, hope and a new beginning can always emerge. Now, as the echoes of these ancient tales begin to soften, and the grand narrative of Zeus's rise settles gently within your mind, feel your own journey nearing its peaceful conclusion. Imagine the vast, star-strewn sky that Zeus commands, stretching out endlessly above you, holding the universe in its serene embrace. Let any lingering thoughts drift away, like wisps of cloud on a still evening. The thunder has quieted to a gentle rumble in the distance, a lullaby from the heavens. The lightning flashes are now soft, shimmering sparks fading into the deepening night. You are safe, nestled comfortably, surrounded by the quiet majesty of cosmos brought to order. The great king of the gods, vigilant in his role, watches over all, ensuring the steady turning of the world, allowing you the peace to fully release and surrender. Let your breathing deepen further, each inhale filling you with calm, each exhale releasing any last traces of tension. Feel the gentle pull of gravity, holding you softly in your comfortable space. The grand stories have been told, the cosmic drama has unfolded, and now it is time for your own peaceful rest. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the powerful myths that shaped the ancient world, and wish to continue these tranquil journeys through stories of gods and heroes, we invite you to become a part of our growing community. Consider subscribing to the Mythos Deep Dive so you never miss another episode of gentle exploration into the rich tapestry of ancient wisdom and wonder. By doing so, you help us continue to bring these timeless tales to life, guiding you towards deeper understanding and, of course, deeper sleep. But for now, release all thought, all worry, all sound. Let the quiet embrace you fully. The journey is complete, the king reigns, and the world is at peace. Drift now, dear listener, on the soft currents of ancient myth, into the deepest, most rejuvenating slumber. Good night.